Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. It's Sunday, May 25th. I already completed my video for today. I'm going to stop and upload that right now. A couple I just did and a couple misspellings in the title. See, in your reality, I just kept on talking. In my reality, I went to upload my video, found I misspelled the words agree and another word, and I posted the video that will be available on Monday, and this one will be available on Tuesday. So I got some comments, a bunch of comments, and there are two or three of them that made me think of a specific subject matter that I haven't talked about. I don't think you've ever heard it before, right? You know, and it's about how people are not evolved yet to handle the power in which we've been given. Now, I might have touched on this subject, but I'm going to talk about examples of this, pretty graphic examples of things that I've seen or know about. And, the evidence is pretty much overwhelming. And so the first comment is this that I wanted to talk about. The person said, if Trump is so terrible, why didn't you take the election seriously, which is what allowed him to be so easily gifted with the victory? You mean my not taking the election seriously is what swung the election for Trump? If I had come out and said, everyone vote for Kamala, we'd have Kamala Harris as president? You mean to imply my not taking it seriously is why Trump's elected right now? Is that what you think? That's the kind of power that you think? That my not taking things seriously has caused the world? You think it's me and my power. If I take things seriously, that I will manifest something that will change the trajectory of the world. It's me being a chucklehead and thinking everything's a joke and not taking things seriously that's fucking up the world, right? I mean, it's a wonderful take, right? So first of all, you guys know the answer to the question. It's not what I want to talk about here, but I'm just going to say this just, because it needs to be said. Number one, elections aren't real. The left-right paradigm thing. Number two, Kamala Harris was a disaster and wouldn't have been any better. Number three, we didn't know exactly what Trump was going to do because he says all kinds of shit he never does. You never know what he's going to do. Like, I didn't know he was going to go full Trump. I had no idea. I didn't even know what tariffs were, right, in terms of, I didn't think he would, any of the things he's doing. He is overperforming even what the Democrats are shocked at all the shit he's doing. Like that Agenda 2025 thing, I didn't take that seriously because it was goofy that they would put that out as a weapon against Trump, and yet they did, and it was like sheer stupidity. But I did say how I was one of the few people that said that he faked his assassination attempt, which, would have caused some people who agreed with me or were swayed over to my, my realization about that to not vote for him possibly. But, what's the difference? We would have had Kamala. So, like, it's just a silly take. But there's a bigger, more profound thing I want to talk about. Let me find the other one here. If you lived in the real world, not just in American City, you'd know that the world is always worst from what they allow us to believe. Stop trying to apologize for whites. This guy thinks I'm apologizing for whites. That would make me actually think of myself as white, that I'm somehow connected to you based in the color of my skin, which is what I don't think, right? Like, I'm not all, identifying as white people. I mean, I'm not apologizing for anybody. Some of the things which I believe that were liberal points of view, reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States is a good book, and it's a good thing to read because it counteracts the indoctrinated history that everybody gets. But the problem with the liberal view that white people are the problem, the people who believe that white people are the only colonizers, is not accurate because every one of these races, at one point or another, invaded other countries, took slaves, and abused nature and other people. It's something that is specific to just white people. White people were better at it, which I'm not saying, I'm not saying that as a white person or as anything. Like, white people are just better at it. And that's why, they built better weapons and better war strategies. And that's not a sign of evolution. It's just, what they were able to do, right? But because of that, they did more damage. And they are looked at as the worst of the worst, but it's all bad. But in terms of what I do or don't identify with, and I don't have a group of people, but I am very clear about one thing, is that people are fucking really unevolved given the level of our capacity to manifest things. In the Sajmark system, there's this thing called the Kashob, where the universe began. It was when there were the creation, there was nothing, and then there was the creation. And God had a thought, let it be, or something like this, right? The equivalent of, let it become, right? And this mere thought, very mere thought, that started the creation of the universe also exists in human beings and higher developed creatures that are, capable of this kind of thought process, right? Our minds are similar to that original thought that existed, that manifested the universe. And that's like an extreme power. We have all these spiritual chakras, we have all these things, power points. And we are able to do things, of course, inventions. We're able to imagine things, we're able to create things. But our level of morality, our level of ethics, our level of empathy and compassion, our level of obedience to God, our level of devotion to God, where we listen to God. Like, we don't listen to God, right? And we have the power of lying. Who amongst us is never told to lie, right? Everybody lies. And that's really the bad part. Like, that's even worse. And we lie so bad that we believe our own lies and we justify our own lies, right? And Trump is, 100% liar, but so is Kamala Harris. The Democrats and Republicans are all liars. And so, you can say that some of them aren't as bad as others, but, in what way, right? Trump's lies are less controllable or more, whatever it is, they are really bad liars, right? Everything they do is a lie. Like, they don't even know what the truth is about themselves or about anything. Like, people who lie so much that, they don't have any truth in them. Like, they're just totally disconnected from the truth on every level. But all of us deceive ourselves. All of us, there's truths. I was talking about in my, last video about the state of shock, where you go into emotional shock because you can't handle reality. Something happened in reality that's so painful that you can't handle it, right? People glitch out, and there's all kinds of issues with people. There's weaknesses in our physical bodies. We're disease prone. There's lots of things that are wrong with people. We have this awesome power of the ability to create things, and also to lie. To manifest our own reality that isn't the same as God's reality, and we all have our distorted realities, our subjective realities. So I don't pretend that human beings are better than what we are. There are a handful of saints, and there's some really good people out there, really devotional people out there. A number of people that are, are people you can trust, that are, righteous, or whatever you want to say. But overwhelmingly, human beings are, again, we have more power than we should have. And that's a problem. Like, we're not mature enough to handle our capabilities. My dog Tulsi will go out, she'll kill a baby rabbits and eat them, and she'll kill some frogs and not eat them. We had these baby wrens, really cute little baby wren birds, and I had to grab her, before she got to them in our barn, things like that. And she'd kill them and not eat them, and that's, in a way that's murder, but she'd be wagging her tail, and she thinks it's something to play with. She doesn't understand life or death. And she's not doing it with some maliciousness, right? Some, where she gets pleasure out of making something suffer. She thinks it's like it instinctually. She has this, the baby rabbit she eats. I mean, it's like she's walking by with these baby rabbits in her mouth, like 3 of them. I have a video somewhere of her swimming after ducks, and she almost got them, right? She's a small little dog, little Papillon. But, the animals, for the most part, chimpanzees are a little bit different. Maybe ravens, some of these things that are a little bit smarter. they don't kill to be mean. They're not like twisted in some way. They don't derive pleasure out of torturing other creatures and things like this. And they have the power of life and death to some other creatures. And for the most part, they only, it's about appetites and eating. Sometimes it's about, defense and territory. They feel threatened. But it isn't out of some malicious, negative tendency. Animals also rape other animals. Like our roosters are basically raping chickens all the time. Chickens just submit to it. Like it's just like they have no choice. But you watch the chicken, the female chicken, it only lasts a few seconds. But the male chicken gets on their shoulders and pulls up the whatever that thing is on their it's a comb. It looks like a little bit of a mohawk. They pull on it until the chicken lifts their flap up, and then they do the deed. But you see this in animals. I mean, various. And there's a shark thing I saw where the sharks would bite the male sharks would bite the female's fin, and the female was in heat and would be surrounded by male sharks. And I mean, it was definitely a rape. Like it's just physically holding down. These animals do this, but they're not doing it with some twisted internal whatever it is, anger towards females, violence against women. It's not some twisted, perverted internal sexual desire. It's just instinctual, right? But in that, animals have a brutal pecking order, and they're brutal. Like if you watch animals on a farm, domesticated animals, even more so in the wild, they have territorial battles, and they're pretty hostile. They're pretty brutal. There's birds that will, like the cowbird, will throw out the eggs of the bird that's made a nest and lay their own eggs in the nest, and the other bird will raise their baby. Like animals do some fucked up shit, right? And they're very brutal. Like they're pretty aggressive and pretty territorial and pretty hostile. It's not an easy life in the animal kingdom. And back when there was dinosaurs and bigger animals, pretty horrific to people. Now we have a hold on it, but like animals are, they're animals, right? The animalistic tendencies. But they're innocent in there, where human beings have twisted ways of doing things. And so, a few things. I worked in these treatment centers, and I was telling my wife about this. So one of the kids I had in the treatment center, it was Eminem was just really big. When Eminem was in his, he was around for 4 or 5 years, and he was really influencing young people. And there's a white kid who was loved Eminem, and he was like just like an unlikable kid, and somebody had real issues. Now the reason he was in this treatment center was his dad remarried this woman he didn't like. And he was like 16. They had like he was 14, 15, whatever. And his new stepmom had a 12-year-old daughter. And he sexually abused the 12-year-old daughter to break up his dad and this woman. Like that was his strategy. He didn't like the marriage, so he decided to sabotage this marriage. And I think they had some money. Like I don't think they were, impoverished people. And so he abused this girl. Now, if you think about pedos being the worst of the worst, this is even worse than that because it involves the sexual abuse, but it's done for such a twisted and dark, manipulative reason, right? And so one time this kid, I had individual therapy sessions. I had 12 kids it was 12 or 14, I can't remember, I think it was 12, who were my clients, right? And I had to have individual sessions once a week with each of these kids. That was part of the requirement they had, to go through. They also had, these various groups. They had every Tuesdays there was the assault cycle groups, the assault cycle 1 and 2, victim empathy, and then relapse prevention 1 and 2. And these were the core teaching groups, and all the therapists had groups that they led during this day, right? And, there was, whatever the therapists were, all these groups there's people who were, kids based in how long they had been there, they go through each one of these groups during a semester of school. And there was also a group for the unit, which was, my 12 kids who lived all in the same unit together. And then there was the individual sessions and the other things, right? And so this kid was in an individual therapy session with me. And he said something to the effect that the only reason people didn't murder was they didn't want to go to jail. And I said, well, there are people who just have no desire to murder other people, or if they do have a desire to murder other people, they would stop. They would, they would think about murdering people, but they wouldn't do it. That it wasn't just about fear of going to jail. They would, they knew they feel guilty, or, they have some remorse, or, something, but they had a higher nature. And the kid was like, fuck you, like he would not believe that such a thing existed because he was a sociopath, right? I mean, everything about this kid screamed sociopath. Now, this kid was smart enough to get through the program and did everything he had to do to get through the program, graduate out of the program, and matriculate back into society. And, I know that this kid is, a nightmare of a person. He's going to do damage. Someone with an attitude like that, who doesn't have any empathy or compassion or anything but, just a hostile sociopath. Now, I didn't have the ability to call him a sociopath, and I'm not sure if somebody else had diagnosed him, with what's called the antisocial personality disorder. They've changed sociopath to that. But that's what this person was capable of. Like he didn't believe that anybody would do good for, he didn't believe in really good at all, right? He believed that everybody was a murderous, horrible people that had negative desires, and only the laws and the threat of prison was keeping them from acting out on that. And that was his reality. That's what he thought everyone else was just like him or whatever it was, right? That was his reality. There was another kid, his parents, rich parents, liberal parents, adopted him from, I think, something like the Philippines, some Asian country. And he lived with his parents, and he was grade A student. He'd come from a very difficult background. And, in his country, he was orphaned and, he struggled and went through a lot of things. And then his parents decided to adopt 2 other girls from that country. And they were maybe 4 or 5 years younger than him. And he didn't want them there. He didn't like them coming in getting attention. And he decided that he would sexually offend one of them. He would convince her to have, sexual relations. She was maybe 12 or 14. He was like 18 at the time, something like that. I don't know what it was. He was older, like he was maybe a senior in high school when he was in the thing. So maybe he was like 16 or 17. She was like, 12, 13, 14. And he's engaged in sexually, an inappropriate sexual relationship with her. She thought it was consensual because she she went to her school and told a bunch of kids that she was dating her brother. Like, it was like, the thing was, it was fucked up, right? And his parents find out about it. He gets busted. He gets thrown in treatment. His parents are like, I can't believe it because this kid had been perfect. Now, this kid never once got in trouble in the treatment center. Everybody loved him. He had a nice demeanor. But he did a real fucked up thing, and this fucked up thing was in him, right? He destroyed this whole family for some, whatever fucked up reason that he had in him, right? But everybody knew this kid as a really nice A student, kid that everybody liked. He didn't cause any problems. He didn't show any signs of having any negativity in him. But there was some fucked up shit, right? There was fucked up stuff in him. Not as bad as the first guy, but also sort of like, a little bit sociopathic. And his, again, it's one thing to do sexual abuse because you have sexual urges or you've been sexually abused yourself, and then that's how you've been trained to be sexually, which is often the case. But to do something like this, ruin some people's lives over some jealous bullshit control stuff is like even darker, right? Then he had a friend who went to his same school, which was really weird. And this kid, was a more affluent school system. And this kid was 16, and he convinced a 13 or 14, maybe a 15-year-old girl, like it was only a year difference, to engage in sexual behavior. Now, it was a little bit forced to use coercion. It was clearly a sexual offense, but it wasn't as bad as some of these other things, right? And, this kid was kind of obnoxious too. Not as likable as the other kid. And he talked about this other kid, how, he went to school with him. He was like, this kid, everyone loved him. No one could believe that the kid, did something like this, right? He was there at school when that went down, and then his thing happened. They both got busted. But then there was a kid that wasn't on these were kids who were my clients. But then there was a kid who wasn't my client who was in the Boy Scouts, and he abused a bunch of younger Boy Scouts. And he was the creepiest, most sexual, weird kid in the fucking treatment center. And everyone else who had to deal with him, like he was just leaving when I was coming in. And his therapist went and begged the school system not to allow him to get out, right? Like he was already talking about how he was going to abuse other kids. He was acting out sexually with kids in the treatment facility, and he was not cured, and he was going to be someone who had like 3,000 victims. Like he was going to be a serial pedophile. So, and he was leaving with a clean record because he got put in by his school, and he was never convicted of any offense. And so there's going to be nothing on his record. He's going to leave probably a little bit more knowledgeable how to get away with it, because that's one of the one of the negative side effects or consequences of going through a treatment like this, is they get to kind of understand how the system works, and they could find ways to get around it by knowing how their assault cycle, this pattern of behavior they would go through worked. They could use that to manipulate it and be better about not getting caught, which was kind of fucked up. Like there was always that risk, giving knowledge to somebody who isn't going to be cured. But, I saw all this fucking shit, right? And a lot of things I'm not even saying here. I worked in 2 of these treatment centers, and just all the fucked up things these kids would do and people did to them, in some cases, their parents. I had kids who, there was a very sexualized 7-year-old kid who, he shouldn't have been in our unit. This was before I worked as I was a clinician in this place I just talked about. But before I worked there, this was where I worked in this treatment center. Then I moved to New Mexico, and I did these other jobs. And then I got married. And then I went to graduate school and got my master's degree. And I came back to the Massachusetts, and I worked in this other treatment center as a clinician, right? So it was a whole thing that I went through. And this first treatment center I worked in, there was this little kid who came in, and he was with the older, with younger kids. There was a younger unit. The kids that were in my unit were usually 10 to 14, but he was so sexual with the other kids. It was a little bit older than most of them. A lot of those kids were like 5, 6, 7 years old, and he was sexual with them. They bumped him up to with these older kids, and I read his treatment file, and his parents, who were both dead, had trained him and his brother to be like little monkeys that would pickpocket people and do sexual favors. They would pimp out their own little kids, toddlers and shit. Just creepy fucking stuff. And his little brother showed up once. Like his brother was 4 or 5. He was wearing a little suit with a little bow tie, a cute little kid. And he came in, and he looked a little sickly. And I said to this woman brought her to see this other kid, right? And this kid looks up and goes, "That's my brother." And I go to this woman who comes in with him. She's like a social worker. I'm like, "What's wrong with him?" She goes, "He's got AIDS. He's dying. We're bringing him to see his brother. Not HIV. He had AIDS, full-blown AIDS. He was dying from AIDS. He was 5 years old because his parents pimped him out to a bunch of freaks who, had it. Someone had AIDS and gave it to this little kid. I mean, that kind of twisted shit, right? And so, I've seen a lot of these kind of things, right? Another story from my treatment center before I want to move on to my brother and war and things. There was another kid who was, when I was a clinician, he was on my caseload, and he was kind of fat and obnoxious and loud, and he was really gay, and he didn't like me at all. So he was in this unit, I was in this one unit where I had 12 kids who were in one half of the unit. There was two sides to the unit, and there was 24 kids, and we had a caseworker that had all 25 kids. The caseworker was in charge of, visitation and dealing with, to some degree, with the, with the social workers and their, parents and things. And I was in charge of the therapy thing aspect. And so this kid was in group therapy every Wednesday, and he was supposed to have one individual session with me. And he would come in every day to individual session and say, I want to leave, I don't want to talk to you, because he fucking hated me. Right? And I didn't like him, and I was not, I was like, great, that's an hour, I was always overwhelmed. So it was like, I mean, if he wasn't going to, he wasn't going to get anything out of therapy because he was, whatever. And he would also leave the group therapy because the other kids hated him because he was, he was very flamboyantly gay, and it triggered a lot of the other kids, and he didn't like me. So he'd just leave, and, he was very hard to deal with. He was acting out all the time. And before I was his therapist, before I was his clinician, he had a lesbian therapist. It was nice. I liked her. She was a nice person, but she would talk to him about, therapy things, touchy-feely things, whatever it is, right? And he liked coming to see her and, whatever. They had a good relationship. But she fucking didn't do right by him. Because at some point, I decided to look into the kid's history. Or whatever it was. Maybe somebody called me. So somebody was concerned. The kid's parents were dead, so he had a grandmother who was elderly, and she couldn't fight for him. But when I looked into it, I found out that the reason he was in there was he and another kid, his same grade, his same age, made out on a bus, and they were, both boys. In the school system, they all had somebody that was paying for them. Sometimes it was the state and a social worker. Sometimes it was a parole officer, right? It could be any number of things. Their agency that was in charge of them. And for this kid, it was a school. And the school freaked out when these two boys made out with each other and sent them both to treatment. And I'm like, you have to have like a code, right? Now, I didn't like this kid. I mean, the kid was really unlikable. Very few staff liked the kid. Or I don't think, he was just obnoxious and hostile. But he was not in there. He was not supposed to be there. And the place that I was working at, at some point, usually there was a waiting list to get in, but I told this story about how the guy who ran the place was this big Russian, the guy had a doctorate or PhD in counseling, but he was like not a therapeutic person. He was like 6'5". He had a beard. He was like some villain from a fucking Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And he was really hard and, not very therapeutic. And he sent a letter out saying we can't let any of the kids out, even if they'd graduated their program, until they had somebody to fill the person's bed, which was, evil. Like, you can't do that. Like, it's like somebody serves their time, and because you don't have somebody to take their place, you violate their constitutional rights. And, I said, I'm not cool with this, right? But I knew that the agency didn't care, the place I work for. So I went directly to his school. I bypassed what I was supposed to do because my boss was a fucking mess. She was the person who ran the counseling division. And she was so stressed out by how dysfunctional the place was that she was having these migraine headaches that she needed to take an opiate, some sort of morphine, that it would get so bad she'd had to take these morphines to stop the pain. And she was unlicensed that I didn't find out until I left there. And, I had accumulated all these supervised hours that would go to me getting my license. And being licensed is really important if you want to have your own individual practice and these things, right? And she was supposed to be supervised. She was supervising my hours, but she didn't tell me she didn't have her. She wasn't certified, which completely fucked me. And I was like, I can't believe you didn't tell. You knew that I thought you were supervised. And she was like, oh, she didn't tell me because what they were supposed to do is hire a supervisor so I could get credit for my hours, right? And so it's just a fucking nightmare. So she was an absolute mess. And so I called the school directly, and I found out they put the other kid in treatment as well. So there was no victim. Like, you can't put somebody in a place like that if there's no real victimization, right? This is about being a sex offender. When what these two kids did was considered consensual. And even though he had this, lesbian counselor who was nice to him and talked to him and, they got along, she didn't do right by him because this kid never should have been in there, right? And so I called the school up and I said, look, there's no way this kid should be here. Like there's no offense here. Like, based in every definition of the, whatever it is, right? And, I got the kid out. I said to them, and they said, what should we do? I go, you got to get him out of here and hope he doesn't fucking call a lawyer. And that made them sort of get motivated to get him out because, they had completely fucked up, right? And the kid came and thanked me, right? When he goes his way out. He's like, thanks. Like fucking, we didn't like each other, but I mean, I did right by him because you have to have like a code, right? When you have power over people's lives, there needs to be some discipline. But I saw over and over again, people just misusing whatever it is, right? Whether it be therapists or it be the agency or the people putting them in, just people not doing right by doing what's fair, we're doing what's just. Like people just don't have that in them, right? They don't, they just people abuse their power. So my older brother, he was a Vietnam vet and he went to school for psychology but never got his degree. He was only a few credits short. And then he ended up working as a counselor, even though he didn't get fully educated, for the Veterans Hospital, the VA, and he worked as a Vietnam vet counselor, and he was really good at doing the job because he had been there himself. He was a good bullshitter. He was good talking to people, but he would talk to these vets. He'd often find them like being homeless and kind of like the original Rambo First Blood movie where they were just lost. They had just never recovered from the war. And he'd go to these powwows, these Indian powwows, Native American powwows, because oftentimes these vets would show up there in places like that. And he told me a few stories of things that these guys saw in the war, and I'm not going to share the stories, but they are fucking horrible. Like, I wish I'd never heard them. And like all the things I read in the intakes for these kids, these intake files that gave the history and what these kids had been through themselves and what they had done to other people. Once you read these things, it's like, oh my God, it makes it real. Things that you see in movies and TV shows, and real things that people do. But there's a couple stories my brother told me. I was like, yeah, I don't want to hear any more, right? Like they're horrible things, like grotesque, disgusting, horrific things that these guys saw or participated in. And so, you see things in movies. There was this show about Genghask Kong. There's multiple pronunciations for it on HBO. And it was a pretty graphic, horrible show in different ways. Kind of interesting historically. This is a time when these Mongolian, warriors were a force. And, you've had these groups of people that have run the world. And you hear what they do during war. And you see some of the things that they do. Like in the movie, his grandfather had these, there was a village and they had trained all these birds for something. Like they took all these birds from these people in this village. And the birds, he set the birds on fire, like thousands of them. And they flew back to the village and they set it on fire. Now this looked a little bit, fishy or something. But I'm like, somebody thought of it, right? And then later in the movie, Genghask Kong would, or, after he had this flashback, he set a bunch of horses on fire and sent them through these tents in these areas. They have those yurts and things that are cloth and burned down these soldiers were sleeping, went in and killed them all. And regularly you would have in these horrific invasions, raping, looting, just all this stuff, abuse of people, slavery, all the things. And, some of the things that people have invented, you can go look at torture devices that have been used by various people. Religions have used them, right? Religious people crucified non-believers or whatever, people who left Christianity. All these things that people have done to each other, and then, of course, doing to the environment, doing to the planet, all based in, one is deception and self-deception. The other thing is just people are really twisted. You have these things that people do. horrible fucking things. And, I know about them, and I've seen the effects of them, and, in these treatment centers, but war is even worse. I mean, people have been in a war-torn country, and the world is a shitty place, right? The world of humans. There's so many twisted things that are going on, and just, people who get off on the making other people, torturing other people, making other people suffer. Even emotionally manipulating them, lying to them, playing on their, like their love or their whatever it is, right? I mean, you see it all the time in movies, TV shows, and, and it really exists. And, like I said, there are good people out there. And there are people who are, have some sort of code, have some whatever it is. But most of this comes down to the abuse of power. I have no desire for power over other people. I don't like supervisory positions. I had a bad past life as a king, and, I think I have an aversion to all that stuff, thankfully because of that, right? But, the misuse of power and what happens when you get power. And what do you do with that power, especially when it's over other people? And the majority of people, even if they're good people who are given power, end up being, twisted by the power and do fucked up shit. I mean, that's what human beings do. And, the other powers that we have are, machines and technology and things and what we're doing to nature, right? We don't, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And, that's human nature right now, where we have, all these abilities, all these technologies, all these things that we can manifest things, all the things that we can do. And we don't have empathy and compassion and wisdom and, connection to God. We don't listen to God. We don't listen to the warnings. We act impulsively. And so, that's what human beings are, like, for the most part. And, our systems and all the things that we've created, it stems from that element. Like, even things that are being invented now. Like, who the fuck thought it was a good idea to split the atom? What do you think was going to end up happening because of that, right? People aren't mature enough to deal with the atomic power and these things, right? Pretty much any of these technologies. We're very primitive, ape-like, in terms of, our emotional ability. I mean, it's almost like chimpanzees with frontal lobes, is it? This cortex. We have some part of our brain that chimpanzees don't have. We have a little extra brain, which helps us, invent things that have higher level consciousness, but doesn't help with our morality and our, being saints and listening to God and being mature and being, all the things that we need to go with it. And so that's the current situation. And, I mean, it's bad because that's what it is. Like, it's, people are capable of horrible things. We have animal tendencies still. We still have some animalistic tendencies towards violence and things, abuse and things like this. We have, habits and appetites we can't control. And then there's, twisted things that happen to people psychologically, and just, people become horrific people, horrible people, serial killers, people who are, get off in the pain and suffering and destruction and, just abominations, right? And, we have these power and the ability to magnify all of those bad tendencies and things that actually powers and things that make those tendencies come out of us, right? And so it's a fucking mess, right? It's just a fucking mess. It isn't like, we've gone astray. Like, we haven't evolved yet. Like some part of us has to develop an aversion towards these things. Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, a world that we destroy, this thing this abomination that we've created. This is the plan here, the plan that's verbalized in the Sajmark system, that this system will be destroyed and people will get a sense of, on a, like, some visceral level, on a spiritual level, that we fucked up, like, collectively, and that we can't do this anymore. We have to be better than what we are. We have to rise up to a higher level, and hopefully that'll happen. But other than that, I don't know. Right? So, but just because you live in a cul-de-sac and you're surrounded by, polite people, doesn't mean that there's not fucking twisted shit all around you. And, like, just that's how everybody is. It's what happens with, if the right conditions, what happens to that cul-de-sac, right? You guys would be killing each other over a ham sandwich. I mean, it's just, just because you have a nice life and, you're not in a war-torn country or whatever, like you don't know what people are capable of until they're right in the right environment or the wrong environment, right? And, that these tendencies that people have. There's this sense in most people that there's a letdown. People ignore the shit that's inside them and the stuff that their group and the people they identify with, or they lie about it. And they look at these other group and go, look, these people are animals. But human beings across the board, every race, every demographic, every group has their monsters. Has their really bad people. And then everybody else falls in some, hierarchy of, anti-God, egoistic and negative characters, character qualities. We all have, it's a level, but we all have our issues. And, it starts off with the ability to deceive and self-deceive. The ability to make choices, the wrong choices. Everyone can choose to do something wrong. We all have the ability to choose to do the wrong thing, and we exercise that choice quite often and, habitually. And that's the worlds that are created by our, creating our own universe, our own world through these wrongful choices is what we're looking at. It's nothing more or nothing less than that, right? And so to expect something more, you have to have lots of people embrace their higher inner nature. And there have been some saints, there's been some higher developed souls here, many of them coming from a higher place. They were already evolved when they came down. And so that's, but you need to have people rise up to a higher level. And so there'll be an opportunity for that as the system collapses. And, I hope that, all of us take that opportunity seriously, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, let's get into the other stuff here. Okay, so this happened.
Time we want to keep you here for just a second, but first, let's check in with the President of the United States. He's speaking over in Morristown.
Something to do, not directly, but indirectly, something to do with the bill, the one big beautiful bill, and it is a big beautiful bill.
It's a big beautiful bill. I mean, it's a big beautiful bill. It's so fucking beautiful. It's so fucking big. It's a big beautiful bill.
And so I think the Senate is going to get there. I hope they're going to get there. I think they're going to have changes. Some will be minor and some will be, fairly significant. But we've been working with the House all the way up. They've been working together. And the Speaker has been working.
Why is the big beautiful bill needs changes? It was a big beautiful bill. What's wrong with the Senate? I mean, didn't they know it's a big beautiful bill? Why would a big beautiful bill need any changes? Should they just pass the big beautiful bill?
With the leader of the Senate, and they've done a great job. John Thune and Mike Johnson have done a fantastic job. They've been working together all the way up, so hopefully that'll be fine.
President Trump, he's under federal investigation. Do you have a comment on that and how that should impact the mayoral election coming up?
No, I was surprised. I didn't know exactly. I just read about it just like you did, having to do with Andrew. I've known Andrew, and we've had an on-off relationship. He was saying the greatest things about me. I'm the greatest president, etc. And then the next day it hit us. But I did a lot for them. I brought in the ship during...
Andrew Cuomo, they are not an off relationship. Andrew Cuomo doesn't like the big beautiful bill.
The COVID crisis, I brought in the Mercy ship, and I built about 3,000 units in the Javits Convention Center, and he didn't use them. I don't understand it. He wanted them, but he didn't use them. But I hope it's going to be okay. I hope it's not going to be serious for him. Let's see what happens.
Wait, what did it say here? GOP invested in Pfizer delayed vaccine rollout.
You spoke to European Commission President von der Leyen. Did you discuss the 50% tariffs, and did you agree to remove?
She just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because I told you specifically, but I told anybody that would listen. They have to do that. And we had a very nice call, and I agreed to move it. I believe June 9th would be, July 9th would be the date. That was the date she requested. Could we move it from June 1st to July 9th? And I agreed to do that. And that she said we will rapidly get together and see if we can work something out.
Another question. You announced on Friday about U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel.
Yeah.
What will the ownership structure look like? What made you satisfied about
It'll be controlled by the United States. Otherwise, I wouldn't make the deal. I went to the unions, to all of the local unions. They all wanted it. And I'm doing it because all of the congressmen came in, about 5 of them, and the others, I understand, are in concurrence. And they asked that I do it. Everybody seems to want it. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see what the final is. But they're going to invest billions of dollars in steel. And it's a good company. Nissan's a very good company.
Nissan's the best.
See. But it's an investment, and it's a partial ownership, but it'll be controlled by the USA.
President Trump, on Saudi Arabia, you came back with a lot of investments.
Okay, this is going to go to the Ukraine at some point. Let's find out that one.
What am I going to tell you?
Oh, here, right here.
People, and I don't like it at all.
Okay, let's go back a little bit farther.
He approved of renaming a street in D.C. It was fairly innocent stuff by American standards.
Let me take a look.
President, can you provide us an update on Russia and Ukraine as well?
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all.
He didn't like it at all. He didn't like that what Putin's doing.
Okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
He didn't like it at all. Trump doesn't like it.
President, what do you want to do about
And
that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally
You're fake. You're totally fake. You guys, if I tell you, you're just going to say something fake about what I'm saying. Fake news.
fake. All right, any other questions? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something...
Not even a little bit. Like, sometimes when he kills people, I like it a little bit. Like, not like 2%. But not this time at all. Zero likes. If Putin, if I had if Putin was doing this on social media, I would not give him a thumbs up.
What happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
Can I follow up on that? Russia
45 and 47. 45 and 47, right fucking there. There it is. Look at that. Fucking look at that right there. That's what it says, 45 and 47.
commander reportedly said that Putin was almost caught in the middle of a drone attack from Ukraine. So do you have any...
I haven't heard that, but maybe that would be a reason. I don't know, but I have not heard that.
President Trump, Secretary...
Oh, so you're ripping the guy and you don't know all the facts? I haven't heard that. Thanks for giving me the intel, which I should be receiving from, I don't know, the NSA and any other, military intelligence that's out there, but thanks.
Accepts acting chief of staff is a Biden administration holdover who has said some very critical things about you and Vice President Vance. Your thoughts on that?
Who is the chief of staff?
Ricky Faria.
I have no idea who he is, but if he did say that, I would recommend that we don't take him. I mean, if he did say something like that, I would recommend we don't take him. But let's see. I'll take a look. Korea, I'll check it out.
Thanks for giving me. Thanks you guys for giving me all this intel. I mean, why does he not know this stuff ahead of time, right? Like, how is he getting information from the reporters?
Yeah.
On Harvard, do you think you'll come for their endowment in any way or go after financial aid?
Well, look, part of the problem with Harvard is that there are about 31%, almost 31% of foreigners coming to Harvard. We give them billions of dollars, which is ridiculous. We do grants, which we're probably not going to be doing much grants anymore to Harvard.
No grants for them. Fuck Harvard.
But they're 31%, but they refuse to tell us who the people are. We want to know who the people. Now, a lot of the foreign students we wouldn't have a problem with. I'm not going to have a problem with foreign students, but it shouldn't be 31%. It's too much because we have Americans that want to go there and to other places, and they can't go there because you have 31% foreign. Now, no
Too many foreigners. Too many fucking foreigners at Harvard.
foreign government contributes money to Harvard. We do. So why are they doing so many? Number one. Number two, we want a list of those foreign students, and we'll find out whether
We want to check it twice. All right, so that was it. So he rips Putin. So then I woke up, and this was from last night. Today is Monday, the I want to say I can just look at my fucking phone, 26th. There's no reason to guess when you have a phone sitting right there. Okay, so let's go to the next piece here.
We are following developments between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine after President Trump called Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, absolutely crazy for his latest actions in the war on Ukraine.
Absolutely crazy. So I guess he doubled down maybe later on in that thing.
Comment coming after Moscow has launched 3 straight nights of drone strikes, the largest aerial assault so far of the 3-year war. At least 12 people have been killed. Trump
What's the music behind her?
Posting that Putin is needlessly killing a lot of people and warning that if he tries to conquer all of Ukraine, it will lead to Russia's downfall. The Kremlin firing back this morning, accusing Trump of, quote, emotional overload. But Trump
Emotional overload. It must have been a True Social post.
Trump also had some criticism for Ukrainian President after Volodymyr Zelensky accused the U.S. of silence following this weekend's attacks. Trump said that, quote, everything's out of Zelensky's mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop, he said. CNN's Kevin
He's such a child. Like, he's just a child. Putin knows this, right? So whatever they're doing there, Trump has no bearing on it, like in terms of...
Attack joins me now from the White House. We are seeing a major shift in tone from President Trump when it comes to Putin, but a very similar tone.
See, somebody wrote a comment saying that everything is revolved around Trump and even my channel now. I don't think I got it was sort of phrased like that. The reason is because, Trump is at the center of the world right now. Like, none of these other things matter because, whatever's happening with Trump is going to lead to major fucking either World War III or economic collapse or something, right? All those things. And it's, it's because Trump doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. He's doing it. Like, they had Gerald Ford who was like brain dead. Like, I was a kid, I was like, is this guy even alive? I couldn't believe, like, even as a kid, Gerald Ford, he had like no pulse. They put him in after Nixon. They made him vice president, and then Nixon had to resign. Gerald Ford had no business being president in terms of, his ability to talk to people. Whatever his thing was, he was like a longtime senator or whatever he was. Just a very plain and simple politician. But he was really, really dull. And Gerald Ford didn't do shit, right? He had no, Trump has a big personality. And he's, come up with a plan here, which was to put in all these taint lickers, Trump taint lickers, into positions, yes men, and go full Trump. And, Trump runs businesses in the ground. And, that's with like just minor level decision making where these things have international ramifications. And Trump's just all over the place doing shit that, he doesn't know, like him talking to those reporters and then getting information from them, right? Like, he didn't even hear any of these things. Like, he should hear all of them. His advisors are probably scared shitless of saying something that he isn't like. He's very impulsive, like a king. It's just behead him, behead that guy, right? Like, no one wants to give him bad news. No one wants to tell him the truth. He watches Fox a lot, and so whatever he hears on Fox, which is like horrible, reporting. And given the fact that he's doing shit, like Trump is doing, he's a doer. He's doing stupid shit, like he just does impulsive, stupid things. He makes quick decisions. Oh, let's make the tariffs 50%, like just arbitrary. Like he doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have like a strategy. I mean, you can clearly see it just based on what he's saying and the way that they're covering it. What the fake Christian Barbie truther says about things. He's just in reaction mode, right? Like, he's a guy that should know about leverage, like from business, but he doesn't know anything about it. Like, he thinks tweeting something, I think Putin's gone crazy. Well, what are you going to do? Economic sanctions? You got to do something, right? You got to do something Putin doesn't like. And Zelensky, you better shut his mouth because he's just making it worse. Well, that's not helping. Like, you got to find some, what the issues are. Like, there's issues involved in the negotiation. The Russians are at war because there was pressure by Biden, or Biden was saying that they were going to add the Ukraine to NATO. Like, that seemed to be the number one reason, at least in terms of the whatever's going on. As much as I know, as here sitting in my, in my bed talking shit, like so. But like in terms of everything that I could see and what was being said, that the Ukraine joining NATO was a deal breaker for Putin, for all the reasons that it's like the two-state solution for Israel. Israel's not going to let Palestine become a state because they have whatever their thing is. Putin didn't want NATO missiles on his border. They didn't want to have military bases from NATO in the Ukraine. And the I don't know what the Ukrainians' deal is, and they seem to have a lot of war hawks that were threatening Zelensky and saying, we want you to be tough on this thing and push for war. And so that, that is whatever it is, right? And so there's the negotiating points. Now Russia has acquired some lands that they're not giving back. They're occupying Ukrainian land. So there's a negotiation there. And there's negotiation points. And, Trump's original idea was, well, let's just make the Ukraine cave, because the Ukraine was Biden supporting, right? Zelensky and the Bidens and the liberals were loving Zelensky, so he was like, fuck Zelensky, and he was going to allow Putin to bomb the shit out of him until the Ukrainians caved. And the Ukrainians are not caving. And this involves all of Europe and these things, right? And so, there's negotiations, and if you want something to stop, you have to do leverage. And, not giving the Ukrainians more money should have been something, and, who knows how that's going, right, in terms of what they're doing on their side. But, there's some kind of agreement that the Russians and the Ukrainians have to make. And if the Ukrainians are unwilling, then the only motivation would be that Russia just, goes in and takes over the whole country, right? Occupies Kyiv, this whole thing. And then just, they become like a puppet state of Russia. And so, Trump doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Like, he's like just talking shit in social media, thinking that's going to change things. You better just shut his mouth. Like, fuck you talking about, right? Because Trump is just arbitrary. He just says things, and does things like impulsively without any forethought. There's been plans in place. Of course, Biden and the Ukraine have a relationship because of his son Hunter and all that shit. What he was, Biden was in charge of the Ukraine under Obama and all that stuff, and the corruption there. And he has financial, they're probably laundering money through there. I mean, I can't imagine some money didn't get laundered through the Ukrainian, war effort. And so that was whatever it was. And Trump wants to destroy everything Biden has done. And so, he was just like, fuck you guys in the Ukraine. You guys are Biden people. And that's what the whole meeting in the Oval Office is. We're not, and American people don't want to give any more fucking money, right? When our economy, all the things that are happening. And so, this is how Trump does things, impulsively, without a plan, and without all the information. Partial information, not a good, he's not got a good noggin. Like, he doesn't have a good noggin on his shoulders. He's not somebody who has a good thought process. And so he's not good at making decisions. He's not good at, getting all the information and being thoughtful about things and being introverted, introspective, and understanding what he's doing. And he tries to bully people, like that's his big thing. And when that doesn't work, then he's fucked. Like, he doesn't have a second, he tries to, and he doesn't have any leverage here. And so, like, there's not much he can do in terms of, and Putin knows it. Like, Putin knows that he's Trump doesn't have anything, so Trump is fighting all these battles with the tariffs, right? The world isn't a volatile place. Like, there's things, beyond anybody's control, the people I call the controllers and anything here in the material world. There's a shifting paradigm. There's something that's ending and there's something that's beginning. There's there's a yuga shift, and there's just people are talking about feeling it. We can all feel it, and so this is, the things that lead up to that, right? Things that don't make sense. Things seem, arbitrary, but these are destinies. These are things that are destined to happen. Like all roads lead to these outcomes, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. And Trump is just, bumbling his way to World War III and the things that are going to take down the global system. Like he's oblivious to it. Like he's, whatever his motivations are, whatever his thinking thought process is like he's just, some, agent of chaos that's going to, bring down the country that he's trying to make great again, because he has no clue how to do anything, right? And he's, it's kind of funny why thinking about it, as a character, like a character in the show. But there are going to be, implications that are, beyond the material, the material manifestation of our collective desires to. I mean, this is the issue that we have, is that we, most of us aren't going to be able to make the adjustments to what's coming next. That earlier comment where that woman said, why didn't you take the election more seriously if you thought Trump was going to be such a disaster, right? Because, deep down, I know. I mean, it's part of my belief system. It's part of what I see on my own, just in my own point of view. And it's echoed in the teachings of the Sajmark system, that this is coming to an end. This has to come to an end. Like, by every measurable standard, this has to come to an end, right? We live in a world where, we're going in the wrong fucking direction. Just look around. Like, who can say we're not? Who can say people are much worse than they were? Each generation is getting much worse, and it's just going to continue. Like, why would it not? Why would all of a sudden kids get better and the system get better, and we'll become more, what we should be? So, that's what I was saying earlier. And so that's not going to happen. Like, it's not an outcome that is there for any of us, right? Like, we're going in the wrong direction. We're going to continue to go in the wrong direction until something changes. And something big has to change, right? There has to be like a divine intervention, which is a pre-planned thing. Like, there's, like you have these resistors in electronics. Like, there's things that, that thwart the electricity, that minimize it or whatever. I kind of only barely know what resistors are, but like there's, electricity going through a, they were I took electrical engineering. My parents got me into college at this place where I was totally clueless, and they thought I would be a good electrical engineer, which was a whole thing. I talked about this in a recent video. A resistor is an electronic device. An electronic device is a passive electrical component that impedes electrical resistance as a circuit element. Its primary function is to impede or resist the flow of electric current, right? And so in this case, what I'm talking about is like there's these things that are there to resist the movement. Like sometimes there's natural components that stop something from growing. Like when they breed tigers to lions, and they have these things called ligers that are huge. They have no, whatever stops them from growing. Like there's things in your genetics that stop you from getting like too big, like some kind of growth impediment. And when you have a lion and tiger breed together, they don't have that, but they can't reproduce, which is probably a good thing, right? Like you'd have all these giant cats that are, half tiger, half lion, whatever it might be. Same thing I think is with mules. Mules are part donkey, part horse, but they can't reproduce. So you have these things that are, there's natural resistance to it. Like there's some things that impede the progress or thwart the flow of something, right? So, we have that in our divine system. There's things that are just natural resistance to, these tendencies to make the wrong decisions and go in the wrong direction. And there has to be divine correction, which we all have, right? So, that's what's happening now. There has to be a correction of, thwarting what Trump's trying to do. So in terms of our system, everyone can see we're going in the wrong direction. Like, and it's just, we're going to keep on going in that direction, right? Where we're going to be less and less what we should be as human beings. Dumber, more entitled, weaker, all these things. We can't go in a direction that, our souls and divinity, and it goes against God's will. It goes against what our soul's purpose is. And so, at some point there has to be a correction. There has to be something that stops the momentum. And, Trump is a part of that. Like, Trump is a big part of that because, he is he is the epitome of the degraded human that, is under functioning. Like, we can't, it's going to get to a point where humans can't function at all. We no longer can do primary labor. We have robots and, whatever doing all that shit, right? I mean, there's some people that are doing primary labor, but you see what happens to the elitists, the people who, there's people who can't even dress themselves. The English lords have these people called dressers. If you ever seen Downton Abbey and those shows like that, they had people just, their whole job is to dress them, right? And so they can't even dress themselves. All the things, I mean, they're no longer, they have people cutting their food like little babies. They no longer do anything, right? And so they become crazy because you're not functioning as you have to do things, like you have to participate in life. Of course, now with the internet and what's happened with these kids who grow up mostly doing internet stuff, right? Doing video games and having a cyber life, and then barely have, in the real world. Like, in the real world was everything. It used to be, when I grew up, there was no alternative to in the real world. You could go on you could be on drugs and, have a distorted reality, but you're still having a real world experience. But now you can, dive into this internet, this vast cyber universe. And so, at some point, there has to be something that stops us becoming less than what we should be and going in the wrong direction. And there has to be divine. If there's a divinity, then there has to be some kind of, this isn't like, oh, I never saw this coming. I gave third dimensional beings who have, strong drives for pleasure and a resistance to pain and, ambition and, egos and selfishness and things. I gave them the power of freedom of choice. And like, this is God talking. And I never saw this coming. Of course, there has to be contingencies, right? There has to be things there to thwart the bad decision making, right? The freedom of choice is really about you choosing to do the right thing. Like, you're at some point coming around to making the decisions your soul and God want you to make. That would be the only reason for freedom of choice, that you would choose to do something as opposed to everything being automatic, where everybody would just choose the right thing. When you get to higher states of consciousness, you choose the right thing all the time. Like somebody who is a ascended soul, someone who has merged in the source, who has given up their freedom of choice, to be a fully functioning, realized soul, have God realization, to become, the divinity within you, the full manifestation of divinity within you, right? You give up more of your ability until you've completely given it up to choose to do the wrong thing. All you ever do is what God wants you to do. You are, you're giving up your freedom of choice, which is why people don't want to be saints, why people don't want to be spiritual. I saw like a video that was recommended to me where Louis C.K. was saying, if there was a God, why hasn't he done anything in 2,000 years? His idea was Jesus, and then there was nothing. It's a comedy bit, so I don't know how much, I didn't listen to it because I was busy. But I had a reaction just to him saying that, because it shows the myopic idea that people think that Jesus is the only saint and the only higher developed soul, the only person who has connected to God, because they're prejudiced. And it's because of what, white people and people of European descent believe, because they're totally unaware of saints that existed in Christianity. Many of them were at least on Jesus's level. Jesus's success, Christian success as a religion, isn't about what Jesus accomplished and what Jesus did spiritually. It has no relationship to his, what would be, considered, and not to say anything bad about Jesus, because it's not. But Jesus had minor accomplishments in the world of spirituality. There's certain levels, like there's a, to anything there's a process. There's a, you go through things to become something, right? So if you became a master violinist or whatever it is, like you go through things, go through the basic training, and you learn the chords, you learn the whatever it is that they call it in being a violinist. You learn the basic, you have a remedial teacher, like it's like the kindergarten of being a violinist, and you learn to play the violin. It makes those horrible sounds. A person who can't play the violin, it's like almost impossible to listen to. But you be able to play the violin, and then you can play it in a way where you're just following what other people do. But you can play it. People like, oh, you can play the violin, and then you can start playing it where you're playing the same songs as other people, but you've reached another level. And then you start writing music, and then you start, coming up with creative content, and there's a flow to it, and there's divinely inspired content, and you become an artist. You become something, where people come to listen to you because, you move the music you're creating and hearing you play it moves people to tears because you've cracked the code. You've gone to another level of artistry, right? You have these different, these different phases, as a novice, as a beginner, and just, being able to competently play the violin to where you're an artist, right? There's all these levels you go through. People who are Trumpers think Trump is an artist because they're like, they're delusional. Like they think he's not any of those things. He's a bozo, right? But there's artistry. And on the spiritual realm, there is all these different levels of your spiritual journey until you merge back into the source. Jesus had not merged back into the source at the time of his death. I don't know where his soul is now, but you can see this clearly if you understand some of the levels and some of the parts of the journey. He was somebody who definitely had made some progress spiritually, but what he left behind was, some good teachings, and some of it was like things he learned from India. Like I just, read that comment in my last video where the person said, I like everything that you say, but the master chargy stuff, but I'm like, that's part of my evolution that I have to give credit to, the teachings that I read. Like some of the stuff is just has nothing to do with anything I thought. It's other teachings that I've read or my own experiences that were influenced by the Sajmarg meditation. So, everybody has some sort of spiritual training. You can't do it on your own. You can connect to God on your own, but to reach higher levels, you need a teacher. You need a guide. You need, that's just a part of anything. There has to be some kind of, not only just written material, but you have to interact with a coach, right? You see basketball players, you see, any number of, artists that are out there, acting, whatever it is. There's coaches. People have to learn from people, right? There has to, they have to, even sometimes it's opponents, right? It's your adversaries that pull out artistry from you. They make you go to a higher level because of your competition. There's all these things that have to happen. And so you have to give credit to that because you didn't do it on your own. First of all, you need God's help. You need some talent. You need to work hard, and you need teachers. You need help, right? And everybody has that. If you don't have that, if you don't have somebody that's, or some, divine being that's there and helping you along. You have a spiritual support team. So these are all part of it. And so Jesus had some spiritual accomplishment, but he had a lot more to go. He was just like a novice, just beginning. And he left behind these teachings, but to the people of the time, it was astronomical compared to what they were doing. And he had this story that the people that grew the religion, remember the religion sat around and didn't really start growing for hundreds of years, right? It didn't make it to Europe. Rome was technically Europe back then, so then they spread whatever. There was Christianity as a minor religion in the European, the Roman Empire. But it was like 5 centuries before, like, it made it into what is now England and things like this, right? Where it started to spread and become a dominant force. And it was because they had rewritten Jesus' story to appeal to people, and they made changes to it to win people over, right? So it's the promotion of Jesus's story, the perversion of his story, the dumbing down of it, and to change it to suit people of Europe that made it take off as a religion and the cross as a symbol. You know, my wife and I were talking about this last night, this idea of body of Christ. You know, I guess it was something we had to do in taking communion in Catholicism. But, you know, we were talking about, like, what part of the body is it? Like, you know, you're eating, you know, a piece of bread that represents Jesus' flesh. Who turns it into Jesus' flesh? Like, how do you even know that it's his flesh, right? It's like a silly thing, you know, that they do. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? You're not eating Jesus' flesh, and why the fuck would you? That's cannibalism, like, you know, the body of Christ. It's a piece of bread. It's a wafer. Who has the ability to transform it? And why does someone in the Catholic religion have the ability to transform a piece of bread into his flesh and wine into his blood? And why would you want to drink his blood? Like, is it that sick? Like, you wouldn't want to drink anybody's blood, but Jesus most of all. Like, have some fucking respect for the guy, right? I mean, it's like, it's twisted, and people just do it like it's some kind of, you know, magic where you're actually, eating what is this really weird wafer? It's grotesque, right? And well, what part of body is it? Like, you know, is it, you know, I mean, if you're eating his flesh, is it his skin, or is it like, you know, what? We were making jokes about it because it's like so fucking weird and stupid. But you have this idea that he somehow, you know, he was the epitome of divinity, and he was the only son of God, even though, you know, all this stuff about everybody has got to be children of God. God created everything. God created the world and everything in it. So, and that's part of the, you know, the teachings. And so, you know, this silly idea that there isn't divinity, there isn't divine movements all the time. It's people just don't want them. There's always higher developed souls here. There's always some people that could train you to be a better spiritual person. People reject that. They don't want that for all the reasons I've said. They don't want to give up the freedom of choosing the wrong thing. And that's the problem with humanity. And at some point, it has to be stopped. You know, it's like a child who is constantly disobeying the parents. And as it grows into an adult and it doesn't learn any sense of discipline or any sense of wrong or right or morality and just does whatever it wants. You have somebody like Trump who doesn't have any, you know, any internal control to do the right thing. Just continuously just does whatever he wants and forces things, you know, and gets more and more power to do it, right? And then you have a disaster. And he's the, you know, the little Lord Fauntleroy, the little Lord that becomes king and just behaves poorly because there's no control over his behavior until people rise up and take him out, right, and get rid of him because, you know, the king is just so abhorrent. Or that nature comes in and takes him out and says, you know, we can't have this anymore. But when you have a whole society of Trumps, people who just want to force their reality on the divine reality, then you have what we have now, and there has to be a correction. And that correction has to be all-encompassing. It has to destroy everything that has been created by these people, and you have to start from scratch, right? Because, like, the whole system has been corrupted, and people have to learn that they have, you know, there's consequences for their wrong choices. And then there has to be like, okay, maybe we'll start listening to God and make the right choices. And you start, you know, this idea we have the right, you know, they're trying to stop our right to party. You know, the Beastie Boys saying, we have to fight for our right to party. Like, you have a right to party. The fuck is that, right? You know, it's some college age, you know, bullshit, right? You have the right to do right. Like everything else is, you have the right to choose what God and your soul want you to do. Everything else is a wrong choice, and it comes with consequences. And those consequences, when they are, you know, when you have this collective mass, you know, immature, entitled people choosing only what they want to do, even though it's bad for them, even though they're not happy, even though they feel like shit, and they're getting lonelier and more depressed as they continuously make wrong choices. to the point at some point the whole thing has to be scrapped and there has to be like some, movement towards redemption where you start sitting there going, oh my God, I can't believe we fucked up this badly. We got to do better, as a race, as a species. Otherwise, the species is worthless. It becomes, a cancer. Like humanity's turned into a cancer. It has to be reversed or it has to be excised out and wiped out because it's not a part of the divine plan. Anyways, let's get back to it here. Okay, no reason for anybody to comment about this. I'm just explaining what happened. So I had kind of a migraine headache. I haven't got one for a while, and I got one 2 nights ago and it was gone yesterday. Today's Sunday. Today's Monday, May 26th. I had it on Saturday, and then it went away on yesterday, Sunday, but it came back a little before I went to bed. It was like lingering, and it was more, the pain wasn't as bad, but I felt just the effects of the migraine, which is, I felt nauseous and these other things, and I slept really well, but I woke up with a little bit of a headache, and it just continuously got worse. Kind of the side effects of the migraines, not so much about the pain in the head, so it was kind of a weird thing. So anyways, I ended up just not stopping this video, and then I didn't get back to it, and it just whatever. So it's 7:30 at night. I'm going to wrap the video up now, and I'll continue tomorrow. This video will be out on Tuesday, I believe, and then, the whole thing. All right. You get it. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.